My name is Mia Adams, and from the moment I first opened my eyes, it seemed like the world had already chosen its favorite. I was born just 3 minutes after my twin sister Chloe. 3 minutes, that's all. But to our parents, Diane and Gregory Adams, it might as well have been a lifetime. Growing up in a quiet little town tucked away in Vermont, our house sat at the end of a winding street lined with tall oaks and old white fences. From the outside, we looked like the picture of middle-class normalcy. My mother Diane was always polished to perfection, like she had just stepped off a TV set, her hair pinned up, her suits crisp, her lipstick always an immaculate shade of coral. My father Gregory was more rough around the edges, always buried in appliance repairs, his hands calloused from years of work. In public we looked so typical, so balanced. But behind our neatly painted front door, the balance tilted heavily, always in Chloe's direction. She wasn't just the firstborn, she was the center of our universe. And me? I was the second thought, the aftertaste they never asked for. I don't remember when I first realized it. Maybe it was small things at first, the shoes we wore to kindergarten. Chloe paraded in a dazzling pair of pink suede Mary Janes, fresh from the newest catalog. I looked down at my own feet, clad in worn sneakers from the clearance bin. "These will do," my mother had said curtly to the cashier, not even glancing my way. I had smiled anyway. I always smiled. What else could I do? Birthdays, Christmas mornings, even Sunday dinners, each event laid out the unspoken hierarchy more clearly. Chloe's gifts towered high under the Christmas tree, while mine sat in one lonely corner, wrapped in reused paper from last year. On our birthdays she blew out candles on cakes she chose, while I clapped politely from the side, pretending vanilla was my favorite too. Still, some small part of me had hope. Maybe if I behaved perfectly, they would notice me. Maybe if I worked harder, smiled brighter, they'd lean in when I spoke too. Our home was full of silent battles. They weren't the kind you could see, no yelling, no broken dishes, just the quiet sting of being overlooked, again and again. Sometimes, when I sat at the dining table, finishing my homework in the long empty afternoons, I would hear the door swing open and the bright, excited chatter of Chloe returning from ballet or painting classes. "Guess what, Mom? I got first place today," and every time, my mother would gasp in delight, pulling her into a hug. "That's my brilliant girl," she'd whisper. No one ever asked me how my day was. Still, I clung to a fragile hope that someday, things would change. Maybe I just needed to be a little better. Maybe tomorrow. One winter night, I padded down the stairs in my socks, the wooden floorboards cool against my feet. My throat was dry and I just wanted a glass of water. But as I reached the bottom step, the low murmur of voices from the living room made me freeze. I knew I shouldn't eavesdrop. I should just turn back. But something in their tone, heavy, raw, kept my feet rooted to the spot. "Do you think we made a mistake?" I heard my mother's voice, thick and tired. "What mistake?" I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. "What do you mean?" Dad asked, his voice low and worn. "I mean, maybe we should have only had one child," she said, her words slicing through the dim room like knives. "Chloe is enough. She's smart, beautiful, full of potential. And Mia?" Mom's voice cracked ever so slightly. "She just exists." There was a long, excruciating silence before Dad answered. "Yeah, life would have been a lot easier with just Chloe." The glass slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a soft, muffled thud. Was I really nothing more than a burden to them? Had I ever been anything else? I ran back upstairs, my heartbeat roaring in my ears, every shaky breath clouding the cold night air in my room. As I curled up under the covers, biting my lip to stop the sobs from spilling out, a new coldness settled in my chest. A line had been drawn that night, one that could never be erased, and for the first time in my life I wondered, if love wasn't guaranteed, what else could I build my life on? The next morning the house felt colder than usual, not the kind of cold that came from winter creeping through the cracks, but the kind that settled deep into the bones. I moved quietly through the kitchen, fixing myself a bowl of cereal while Mom hummed at the stove, flipping pancakes. Chloe skipped in, still wearing her new bright red scarf, laughing about something on her phone. They barely glanced at me. "Morning," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom slid a plate onto the table without looking up. "For Chloe," she said lightly, setting the golden pancakes in front of her. I stared at my plain cereal, my stomach tightening. Was it really always going to be this way? Was there nothing I could ever do to change it? The answer was already woven into the silence between us. Later that afternoon, while Chloe practiced her pirouettes in the living room, Mom called out sharply, "Mia, finish your spelling drills, we don't have time for slackers." Her words hit harder than any slap could have. I wasn't even someone who could demand a moment or a choice. I was a task to be completed, a checklist to be ticked off. I gathered my books and sat down at the dining table, my pencil scratching fiercely against the paper. Outside, the winter sun was already sinking, throwing long, sad shadows across the room. Chloe twirled and laughed, her music loud and joyful. Mom watched her, her eyes sparkling with pride. "You're a star, baby," she said warmly. I pressed harder on my workbook, the lead breaking under my grip. Why not me? Why was it so easy to love Chloe, and so impossible to love me? I finished my assignments in record time that night, fueled by a restless energy I couldn't name yet. When I brought the completed sheets to Mom, my heart fluttered in my chest, still hoping foolishly for a small word of praise. She glanced at the stack without interest. "Good, now stay out of trouble," she muttered, already turning away as Chloe bounded up, showing her a glittery new hair clip she had made at ballet class. "Look, Mommy, isn't it pretty?" Chloe beamed, spinning to show it off. Mom bent down, touching the clip tenderly, her voice soft with wonder. "It's beautiful, honey, just like you." I stood there invisible. Something sharp and unfamiliar stirred in my chest. Not anger, not jealousy exactly, but something different. A tiny voice whispering from somewhere deep inside, "You're wasting your heart waiting for them." That night, after they had gone to bed, I sat at my small desk by the window, staring at the sky. Only a few of the glow-in-the-dark stars I had once stuck there remained, peeling and faded. But the real stars outside blinked stubbornly, distant but alive. I pulled out a spiral notebook from my drawer, the one I had been too scared to write in until now, and opened to a blank page. The first words came slowly, my hand trembling. Tonight, I realized, I can't keep begging for love that doesn't exist. Maybe it's time to build a life where I don't have to be second best. I paused, staring at the words under the dim lamplight. They felt raw, almost too painful to look at. Was it selfish to want more? Was it wrong to believe I deserved better? I didn't have the answers yet. But as I closed the notebook and tucked it under my pillow, a strange feeling settled into my chest. Not happiness, not sadness, something new. Something like strength. Maybe I couldn't force my parents to see me. Maybe I couldn't rewrite the family I was born into. But I could start writing something else. Something mine. And for the first time in my life, I fell asleep not clinging to desperate hopes, but holding on to a small, flickering determination. Tomorrow would come. And so would the first step into a world I had to carve out for myself. The next weeks passed in a strange sort of blur. At first I moved carefully around the house, testing the waters, still half hoping for a sudden shift, for some hidden kindness to finally reach me. It never came. Instead, life continued exactly as it always had, with Chloe at the center and me orbiting unseen at the edges. One Friday afternoon, when Chloe waltzed into the living room clutching a shiny new certificate from her acting class, Mom gasped and pulled her into a hug. "My little star," she cooed. I stood there quietly, clutching my math test in my hand, a paper with a perfect 100 circled in red. No one asked, no one looked. That night, alone in my room, I stared at the test paper until the numbers blurred. Why am I still waiting for them to care? When will I finally be enough? The answer floated in the heavy silence. Never. And somehow, instead of breaking me, that thought planted something different. A stubborn little seed of resolve. If they wouldn't see me, fine, I would make the world see me. I threw myself into my studies with a hunger I had never known before. While Chloe flitted from ballet to piano to art class, I camped out in the school library after hours, my fingers racing across pages of advanced textbooks. I tackled extra reading, volunteered for every writing competition, signed up for debate club, even though public speaking made my stomach knot. Some days I would catch my reflection in the library window, hunched over books, hair a mess, eyes burning from too many late nights. Is this what real freedom feels like? I wondered. Not easy, not glamorous, but mine. At school, teachers began to notice. Miss Simmons, my English teacher, called me aside after class one day. a rare smile on her usually stern face. "Mia, your essay was exceptional," she said, handing me the graded paper. "Have you considered entering the state writing competition? You have something rare." Something rare. The words clung to me like a second skin all the way home. That evening, I set the competition form on the kitchen counter. Mom glanced at it, barely skimming the title. "We can't afford to waste time on hobbies," she said briskly, brushing it aside. "Focus on your schoolwork. Chloe has enough on her plate without you making demands." Chloe looked up from the couch, smirking slightly. I gathered the form quietly, folding it into my pocket. Did dreams count as demands now? Was there no space for me to want something just for myself? I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Instead, I stayed up late in my room, drafting my competition piece by the light of my old desk lamp. The story flowed out of me like a river that had been dammed up for too long. Bitterness, hope, anger, defiance, all woven into words. When I finally set my pen down, my hands were trembling, but my heart felt strangely light. In the mornings, while Chloe flaunted new dance routines, I slipped quietly out to the library. In the evenings, while she basked in endless praise, I built invisible ladders out of books, essays, science projects, scholarship forms. Every small victory was mine alone. When I won the county-level essay competition, they announced my name over the loudspeaker during morning assembly. The applause echoed in the gym. I scanned the crowd instinctively. Chloe sat stiffly among her friends, her mouth a hard line. When I got home that evening, Mom didn't mention it at all. Instead, she beamed about Chloe landing a spot in the spring ballet recital. "Isn't it wonderful?" she gushed, squeezing Chloe's hands in hers. I nodded quietly, used to the taste of being invisible. Later, in the privacy of my room, I pinned the award certificate above my desk, not to boast, but as a silent promise to myself. You are real, you are capable, you are enough, and day by day that promise grew stronger. It happened on a lazy Sunday afternoon when the sky hung low and gray, and the air inside the house felt heavier than usual. Mom and Dad were out shopping with Chloe, no doubt picking out another set of trophies for her room. I stayed behind supposedly to catch up on homework, though no one really checked if I did. I wandered aimlessly through the house, every creak of the floorboards familiar, every chipped piece of furniture heavy with memories I didn't want. I ended up in the living room, standing before the old bookshelf that nobody touched anymore. I don't know what made me reach for the bottom shelf, the one covered in dust, half hidden behind a broken floor lamp. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the persistent whisper in my heart telling me that somewhere there had to be more. My fingers brushed against something wedged deep in the back, a battered leather photo album. The cover cracked when I opened it, the pages inside yellowed and curled at the edges. I flipped through it slowly, my heart tightening with each unfamiliar face smiling back at me. One photo stopped me cold. A younger version of my mother stood stiffly between an older couple, a man with kind eyes and a woman whose smile looked so heartbreakingly warm it made my chest ache. Beneath the photo, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Diane with Mom and Dad, 1992. I stared at it, blinking hard. Mom had always insisted she had no family. When I asked once as a child, she had brushed it off with a sharp, "They're not part of our lives." Why would she lie? What had happened? My fingers trembled as I flipped more pages, and tucked between two of them, I found a crumpled yellowed letter. It smelled faintly of old paper and forgotten things. "Dear daughter, we hope to see you and the children again soon. Our door is always open. Love, Mom and Dad." The date was nearly a decade ago. A strange pressure built in my chest, almost too big to contain. They had wanted to see us. They had reached out, but we had never answered. Somewhere deep inside, the child in me, the one who had longed for open arms and gentle voices, awoke. Could it be? Could there be someone out there who had loved me all along? I snapped the album shut, adrenaline pounding in my ears. My hands shook as I rummaged through the nearby drawers, desperate for more clues. At the very bottom of Mom's desk drawer, hidden under piles of unpaid bills and old receipts, I found it, an old black address book. Most names were scribbled out, but one entry was circled harshly in red ink, with the words "Do Not Contact" scrawled next to it. William and June Carter. I stared at the name, the address printed neatly below it. William and June, Mom's parents. Were they still alive? Would they even want to see me after all these years? Fear twisted in my stomach. What if I went and found nothing but resentment? What if opening this door only led to more disappointment? But even as the doubts gnawed at me, something stronger rose to the surface, an aching, stubborn hope. That evening, while Mom and Chloe gushed about their shopping spree over dinner, I tucked a folded piece of paper, the address, deep into my backpack. "You're awfully quiet, Mia," Mom said lightly between bites of her salad, not even bothering to look up. I smiled thinly, hiding the hurricane building inside me. "I'm just tired," I murmured. "Tired of waiting, tired of pretending, tired of belonging nowhere." The next afternoon, I lied easily. "I have a group project meeting after school," I said, slinging my backpack over my shoulder. Mom barely nodded from the kitchen, too busy scrolling through her phone. I took the number 7 bus, riding past the familiar rows of neat houses until the streets turned cracked and worn. The air smelled different here. Less polished, more real. When I got off at the final stop, my palms were sweating. I followed the address down a narrow lane until I found it. House number 42. A small white house with a sagging green picket fence and a wild tangle of daisies growing along the walkway. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I walked up to the door and raised my hand to knock. It swung open before I could. An elderly woman stood there, her silver hair pinned neatly back, her eyes widening in shock. Behind her, an elderly man leaned heavily on a cane, staring at me as if he had seen a ghost. Who are you?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "I'm Mia," I said. I forced the words out before fear could swallow them. "I'm Diane's daughter." For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. Then the man's face crumpled, and he stumbled forward, tears spilling down his weathered cheeks. "Oh God, June," he whispered. "Look, she looks just like Diane did at her age." The woman gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Without hesitation, she pulled me into a hug so warm, so fierce, I nearly collapsed from the force of it. "My sweet girl," she choked out, holding me tight. "We've waited so long." I clung to her, feeling something break open inside me. Something old and aching and desperate. Home. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was wanted. The hours I spent in that little white house blurred into something almost magical. William and June, Grandpa and Grandma, I quickly found myself thinking, ushered me inside like I was a missing piece they had been waiting years to find. The house was small but alive, every corner filled with books, old quilts, photographs that smiled down from the walls. We sat together on a faded couch as they told me stories about my mother, before she became the sharp, polished woman I barely recognized. They spoke of a Diane who laughed easily, who chased dreams barefoot through summer fields. A Diane who once loved deeply before life taught her to be ashamed of where she came from. "We never stopped loving her," June whispered, her thin hands squeezing mine. "And we never stopped loving you, even when we didn't know you yet." Tears burned behind my eyes. Could it really be this simple? Was love supposed to feel this easy, this natural? When I finally stood to leave, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and lavender. June pressed a small paper bag into my hands. "Homemade cookies, warm and sweet. Whenever you miss home, just come back," she said, brushing my hair behind my ear like I'd always dreamed a mother would. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As I walked back to the bus stop, the bag of cookies cradled against my chest, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I had a place. I had a choice. The next weeks shifted something fundamental inside me. At home, Mom and Chloe continued their usual dance, praises, shopping trips, performances, but their world no longer felt as suffocating as before. I moved through the house like a ghost, but this time, by choice. Their indifference couldn't hurt me now. Their approval, once the sun I desperately orbited around, had dimmed into something small, almost pitiful. I poured myself even deeper into my studies, driven not by desperation, but by a quiet certainty. I was building something bigger than they could ever understand. The woman gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Without hesitation, she pulled me into a hug so warm, so fierce, I nearly collapsed from the force of it. "My sweet girl," she choked out, holding me tight. "We've waited so long." I clung to her, feeling something break open inside me, something old and aching and desperate. Home. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was wanted. The hours I spent in that little white house blurred into something almost magical. William and June, Grandpa and Grandma, I quickly found myself thinking, ushered me inside like I was a missing piece they had been waiting years to find. The house was small but alive, every corner filled with books, old quilts, photographs that smiled down from the walls. We sat together on a faded couch as they told me stories about my mother, before she became the sharp, polished woman I barely recognized. They spoke of a Diane who laughed easily, who chased dreams barefoot through summer fields, a Diane who once loved deeply before life taught her to be ashamed of where she came from. "We never stopped loving her," June whispered, her thin hands squeezing mine. "And we never stopped loving you, even when we didn't know you yet." Tears burned behind my eyes. Could it really be this simple? Was love supposed to feel this easy, this natural? When I finally stood to leave, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and lavender. June pressed a small paper bag into my hands, homemade cookies, warm and sweet. "Whenever you miss home, just come back," she said, brushing my hair behind my ear, like I'd always dreamed a mother would. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As I walked back to the bus stop, the bag of cookies cradled against my chest, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. I had a place. I had a choice. The next weeks shifted something fundamental inside me. At home, Mom and Chloe continued their usual dance, praises, shopping trips, performances, but their world no longer felt as suffocating as before. I moved through the house like a ghost, but this time by choice. Their indifference couldn't hurt me now. Their approval, once the sun I desperately orbited around, had dimmed into something small, almost pitiful. I poured myself even deeper into my studies, driven not by desperation but by a quiet certainty. I was building something bigger than they could ever understand. Each night after dinner, while they laughed over TV shows in the living room, I retreated to my tiny bedroom and filled out college applications under the glow of my lamp. Columbia University, NYU, Stanford, long shots maybe, but they were my shots. One evening, as I sat cross-legged on my bed drafting yet another scholarship essay, I heard a sharp knock on my door. "Come in," I said flatly. Mom poked her head inside, her mouth set in a tight line. "Chloe needs the computer," she said without apology. "You're hogging it with all your forms." I closed my laptop without a word, sliding it off my lap. As she turned to go, she added almost absently, "Don't get your hopes up too much, Mia. Schools like that, they don't usually take charity cases." The door clicked shut behind her. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the spot where she had stood. Maybe not for girls like the one she chose to see. But what about girls like the one I was becoming? I picked up my pen and kept writing. A month later, on a chilly afternoon, I came home to find an envelope waiting on the front porch, heavy, official, stamped with Columbia University's crest. My hands shook as I ripped it open right there on the steps. The words blurred in and out of focus as tears welled up. "Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you admission to Columbia University with a full academic scholarship." For a moment I couldn't breathe. I clutched the letter to my chest, laughing and crying all at once under the cold Vermont sky. I had done it. Not to impress them, not to fill some hollow space they had carved into me, but for me. When I walked into the house that evening, Mom and Chloe barely looked up from their phones. "I got into Columbia," I said, my voice steady. "That's nice," Mom murmured without enthusiasm, scrolling past a video of Chloe's latest recital. "Is it even safe in New York?" Dad grunted from the recliner. Chloe giggled without looking up. "Good luck, Mia. Hope you can handle it." I smiled to myself, pocketing the acceptance letter. I didn't need their celebration, their permission, their blessing. I already had everything I needed tucked into my heart and waiting for me in a little white house full of wild daisies. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the driveway as the taxi rolled to a stop. I stood on the porch, arms crossed loosely, watching them step out one by one. Mom first, perfectly coiffed, shielding her eyes from the light. Dad next, dragging their massive designer suitcases. Chloe last, sunglasses perched atop her head like a movie star. Their laughter floated across the lawn, careless and high-pitched, as if they hadn't left me behind for a week without a second thought. The new silver Lexus gleamed in the sunlight behind me, an undeniable symbol that the world they thought they controlled was shifting under their feet. Mom's gaze landed on the car first. She froze mid-step, the smile sliding right off her face. What "What is this?" she asked, voice too bright, too strained. I twirled the key lazily between my fingers, savoring the moment. "Welcome home," I said, keeping my voice cool. "Oh, by the way, that's my graduation gift. From my grandparents." The silence that followed cracked the summer air like thunder. Chloe stumbled forward, her mouth hanging open. "You," she stammered. "You have a new car?" Dad yanked off his sunglasses, eyes wide and disbelieving. "You never told us your grandparents were still alive." I shrugged. "You never asked." Mom recovered first, smoothing her hair with a trembling hand. "Mia, sweetheart," she began, her voice sugar-coated and brittle. "You know, Chloe is starting college soon. She really needs a car. This one would be perfect for her." I blinked at her slowly. Was she serious? "Are you suggesting I give Chloe my car?" I asked, letting every ounce of disbelief drip from my voice. Mom's smile sharpened. "Of course, you're working part-time at a coffee shop. You don't need anything fancy." Chloe tossed her hair, her confidence returning. "Yeah, you barely go anywhere important. I'll put the car to better use." For a heartbeat, the world stood still around me. I could almost see the familiar script forming, the expectation that I would cave, that I would shrink back like I always had. But not this time. I laughed. A full, genuine laugh that rang out across the driveway, startling all three of them. "That's hilarious," I said, stepping down the porch steps toward them. "You spent years pretending I didn't exist. Now that you see something shiny, suddenly I'm useful again?" Dad's face darkened. "If you refuse to share, don't expect to stay in this house." I smiled wider, feeling a strange, exhilarating freedom surge through me. "I don't plan to." I walked to the car, popped open the trunk, and revealed 2 suitcases neatly packed and ready. Mom's mouth fell open. "You're leaving?" Chloe squeaked, incredulous. I slammed the trunk shut with a satisfying thud. "I've been ready for a long time." As I opened the car door, I turned back one last time. "And one more thing," I said, letting the words cut clean and deep. "I got accepted to Columbia University, full scholarship." The impact hit like a physical blow. Mom clutched the taxi door for balance, her face draining of color. Dad stared at me as if he had never seen me before. Chloe's expression twisted into something ugly. Jealousy, disbelief, fear. I slid into the driver's seat, lowered the window, and let the engine purr beneath me. "Have a wonderful summer," I said, voice light and calm, "while I start my real life." Then I pressed the accelerator and drove away, leaving them standing there, small, stunned, and irrelevant. For the first time, the weight slid off my shoulders completely. I was free, not just from their house, not just from their indifference, but from the invisible chains that had bound me for so long. And as the town rolled past, trees and houses blurring into a sun-drenched mosaic, one thought pulsed steady and true in my chest. I don't need their love to be whole. I had already found the only love that mattered. Love that asked nothing, expected nothing, gave everything. Love that had been waiting for me all along, in a little white house filled with daisies. The drive to my grandparents' house felt surreal. The familiar streets unfurling like pages of a book I was finally ready to close. When I pulled into the driveway, William and June were already waiting on the porch, their faces lighting up as soon as they saw me. I stepped out of the car, and before I could say a word, June wrapped me in a hug that chased every lingering shadow from my heart. "Welcome home, sweetheart," she whispered. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Home. A word that finally fit. The summer that followed was unlike anything I'd ever known. Mornings began with the smell of coffee and fresh bread wafting through the house. Grandpa William would sit on the porch, newspaper in hand, calling out little pieces of news while Grandma June bustled in the kitchen, humming old tunes under her breath. No shouting, no cold dismissals, no invisible expectations hanging in the air. Just peace, just belonging. During the days I helped around the house, mowing the lawn, fixing creaky cabinets, picking wild daisies for the kitchen table. In the afternoons, I worked part-time at a cozy local cafe, saving every penny for the small dreams I could finally call my own. And at night, I would sit by the window of my little room, watching the stars blink against the dark velvet sky, a journal open on my lap. Sometimes I wrote about my day. Sometimes I wrote about the future I was slowly, stubbornly carving out for myself. But most nights I simply wrote down the truth. I am enough. The words still felt fragile sometimes, like they could break if I whispered them too loudly. But they were real. And they were mine. As September approached, my grandparents gave me one more gift, a small apartment near Columbia University. It wasn't extravagant, a modest third-floor walk-up with scuffed wooden floors and a narrow little balcony that caught the morning sun just right. But when I turned the key in the door for the first time, a rush of emotion flooded me. This was my space, my life, my beginning. We spent the day moving in boxes, William grumbling good-naturedly about his back, June lovingly arranging a small vase of fresh flowers on my windowsill. That night, as we ate takeout on the living room floor, Grandpa lifted his soda can in a toast. "To Mia," he said warmly, his voice thick with pride, "to a life built with your own two hands." We clinked our cans together, laughter filling the room, and for the first time the future didn't feel scary. It felt like an open door. College life was a whirlwind. Lectures, study groups, late-night cramming sessions fueled by bad coffee and better friendships. In class, nobody knew about the family I had left behind. They only knew me. Mia Adams, the quiet girl who asked the hard questions, who stayed late after seminars, who volunteered for every project that sounded a little too big, a little too daring. And slowly, new friendships blossomed. There was Emma, a sociology major with a laugh like wind chimes and a knack for finding beauty in the ordinary. There was Daniel, an economics student with messy hair and kind eyes, who stayed after class just to argue about books and life. We built something real, something I didn't have to earn or beg for. One crisp autumn evening, sitting out on my tiny balcony, Daniel handed me a steaming mug of hot chocolate and said, "You know, Mia, you don't realize it, but you're one of the strongest people I've ever met." I blinked at him, the city lights blurring in my vision. "I used to think strength meant pretending everything was fine," I said softly. "But now? I think it's being able to walk away when you know you deserve better." He smiled quietly, bumping his shoulder against mine. "Then you," he said, "are the strongest person in New York." I laughed, really laughed, and for once there was no bitterness, no hollow ache beneath it. Just joy, just freedom. In between classes and part-time shifts, I started planning my next dream, a community project to support students who, like me, had once felt invisible. Workshops, scholarships, mentorship programs. I wanted to build a place where no one had to prove they deserved to exist, where every kid would know from the beginning that they mattered. It was a dream born not from bitterness, but from the fire that had kept me alive when no one else had cared. One evening, as I was sorting through old notes in my apartment, I stumbled across a battered photo, the family picture from years ago, where I stood stiffly off to the side, half hidden behind Chloe's dazzling smile. For a moment I stared at it. The old sadness rose up, familiar and heavy. But then I smiled, a quiet, certain smile, and gently tucked the photo back into a drawer. It was just a page in my story. Not the ending, not even close. On the morning of my graduation from Columbia, I stood in front of the mirror in my tiny sunlit apartment, adjusting the honor cords draped over my shoulders. The robe hung heavier than I expected, but maybe it wasn't the fabric. Maybe it was the weight of everything it took to get here. The nights I almost gave up, the battles fought alone, the dreams stitched carefully back together when they tore. I stared at my reflection. The girl who once hid in the corners of family photos, who once lowered her voice so no one would call her too much, she wasn't here anymore. Instead, a young woman looked back at me, steady and bright-eyed, wearing every scar like armor. I smiled. It wasn't a smile of defiance or revenge, it was a quiet, victorious smile, the kind that didn't need anyone else's permission to exist. The ceremony was held under a clear blue sky, the white tents rippling in the gentle breeze. Students milled about, laughing, hugging, snapping photos. I sat among them, feeling strangely weightless. When my name was called, I rose and crossed the stage. The applause blurred into a single rushing sound, but I heard it, I felt it. Not because it validated me, but because I knew that I had earned every step leading up to this moment. When the dean shook my hand and handed me the diploma, I didn't look into the crowd searching for familiar faces. I knew where my real family was, waiting patiently back home, maybe watching the live stream on a tiny flickering laptop, beaming with the kind of pride that didn't come with conditions. I clutched the diploma to my chest as I stepped down, the sunlight warm against my face. That evening, as the city lights blinked awake one by one, I sat alone on the balcony of my apartment, sipping a cup of coffee. The streets buzzed with life below, endless and full of possibilities. I thought back to the little girl who once stared at the ceiling, wishing for a sky full of stars like Chloe's. Now, I realized, I had built my own sky, one that stretched wider and brighter than anything they had ever imagined for me. And it was only the beginning. My phone buzzed against the table. A message from Daniel. "We're all meeting at the cafe to celebrate. You better come or I'm sending a search party." I laughed and typed back quickly, "On my way." Before I grabbed my bag, I paused. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my old journal, the one filled with shaky words scribbled during the darkest nights. I flipped to the first page. Tonight, I realized, I can't keep begging for love that doesn't exist. I traced the faded letters with my fingertip, feeling a pang of tenderness for the girl who had written them. She didn't know it yet, but she would survive. She would thrive. She would rise higher than she ever thought possible. I closed the journal gently and tucked it back into the drawer, not out of sadness but out of gratitude. Every broken piece had built this life. Every lonely night had paved this road. As I stepped into the bustling streets of New York, the air was alive with the sense of spring and fresh beginnings. The city stretched out before me, huge, chaotic, and waiting. And I was ready, not because someone had finally chosen me, but because I had finally chosen myself. From a forgotten afterthought in a narrow little home in Vermont, to a woman who carved her own space in the world, I was no longer chasing anyone's love. I was chasing my own light, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of anything anymore. Not rejection, not loneliness, not failure, because I knew now the only approval I would ever truly need was already mine.